What is it that makes you happy? Or how do you define happiness? Now, I'm asking these questions because I think we live in a society that has a tough time finding happiness. Like, people have so much going on in their lives. We are the most connected generation that has ever lived because of technology, and yet we feel so disconnected from the people around us at the same time. And because of that, it's more common than ever for someone your age to struggle with stress, anxiety, and depression. You are simultaneously the generation with the most potential to change the world and the generation that is the most burdened. And so, what are we talking about today? Is it depress the heck out of us day, Jeff, because you're doing a super job? But no, today I want to talk about joy and happiness, because we spent the last few weeks talking about the importance of serving others, but it's hard to feel motivated to think about others when you're so tired and burdened and unhappy yourself. Like, too often, our happiness is dependent on our circumstances. Now, let me show you what I mean by this, using this handy-dandy balloon that I've got right here. I want you to imagine that this balloon represents the circumstances of your lives. Like, sometimes the circumstances of your lives are pretty awesome. Like, maybe you're crushing it at school, you've got an awesome boyfriend or girlfriend, things are going smoothly at home, or you just won a game of Fortnite last night. Like exciting, important life stuff. But then there are other times where life isn't so easy. Like, your grades start to slip, or you get dumped, or your family dynamics are tense, or it turns out you're actually really bad at Fortnite. Like, everyone's circumstances in life will go up and down depending on the day, but the mistake that we often make is that we oftentimes attach our happiness to our circumstances. And when we do that, our happiness, it goes up and down as our circumstances change. But what happens when life gets really hard? Like, what if your difficult circumstances go beyond a breakup or a bad test score? Like, when you've attached your happiness to your circumstances, what happens when your circumstances of life hit rock bottom? What happens is your happiness will have nothing to hang on to. But what if there was another way? Like, what if there was a way to separate your happiness from your circumstances so that no matter what was happening to or around us, we could still find a reason to be happy instead of just exploding? And so for today, I want to dig into the book of Philippians. And now, I've told you about Paul before. He's the writer of this book, and he wrote a lot of the New Testament and was responsible for bringing the message of Jesus to tons of new places. And like I mentioned last week, Paul wrote a lot of letters, including the letter he wrote to a group of Christians who lived in the ancient city of Philippi. But do you know what's really interesting is that Paul, he wrote this book from jail. Like, he had been thrown into prison and threatened with death as a result of preaching the message of Jesus. Like, some people, they didn't want to hear it, and so they threw Paul in jail to prevent him from saying another word. And from that jail cell, Paul wrote this letter that we know today as the book of Philippians. He was literally in chains as he wrote these words. I have learned to be content in whatever circumstance. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Like, what? But Paul was literally in jail, shackled, hungry, beaten, and possibly awaiting death, and he said he was content? Like, I could be laying on my couch eating chips and not be content because I was out of queso, which has been a real problem in my life before. But like, this guy says that he's content while sitting in prison with absolutely nothing. Like, how? It's like he said in verse 13, it's through strength that he found in Jesus. Like, Paul's happiness, it had nothing to do with where he was or what he had, but it had everything to do with the Savior that he trusted. He's the God who never, ever changes, even when our circumstances do. And the kind of happiness that Paul describes is so different from the balloon happiness from before. Like, the world's happiness is so dependent on circumstances that change, but the kind of happiness that Paul experienced is dependent on the goodness of our God, who never changes, which is why I'd call Paul's happiness joy. It's a joy that endures even when life is a mess. It was a joy that gave Paul the ability that even when his circumstances were at their lowest, he was still writing letters of encouragement to others. And Paul, he wasn't living a me-first kind of life. Paul was committed to living the after-you life that Jesus modeled. And he did just that. Even after he had been thrown into prison, Paul found joy, and then he spread it. Paul understood that living selflessly, it requires sharing your joy. But now let's rewind for a second, because we've spent the last few weeks talking about the importance of serving others, but it's kind of hard to feel motivated to think about others when you're so tired and burdened and unhappy yourself. Like, you're called to live selflessly like Jesus did, but it's not easy to do when you're feeling stuck in your own problems. And so what do? Like, how do we find true joy so that we can go out and share that joy with others? And I think we can do that by asking ourselves and answering these three questions. Who is God? What has God done? And who else needs joy? Because when we answer the question, who is God, we're going to find the anchor of our joy in the person He is. And if we answer the question, what has God done, we remember the already great things that God has done and is doing in our lives. And when we answer the question, who else needs joy, we begin to see the world around us outside of ourselves so that we can serve and encourage and share joy with them. Like, from the person in your school who needs joy the most, to your friend who could use a pick-me-up, or to your family who just might need an extra dash of joy in their life. Sharing your joy with someone else will help you find more of it. And so as we close out the series, I want to leave you with a little pep talk from someone who's way cooler and wiser than I'll ever be. We've been talking about how living an after you kind of life can literally change the world, but I know that sometimes that it seems difficult or even impossible to do. So if at any point during this conversation about living selflessly, you've wondered, like, what is the point of this? Or why should I even bother? This is a video for you, so check it out.
There are lots of ideas how you can change the world. Some people think you should just complain about it. That won't change the world, it'll just make it mad. Some people think you have lots of money, making it rain everywhere you go. Holla for $1. Some people think you have to be really loud and yell a lot. It's like with a bullhorn shouting, "Hey you, yeah you, do it my way right now, you heard?" Other people choose to just make fun of everything. That's dumb, everyone's dumb. It's easier to make fun of stuff, but it's cooler to make stuff. Some people think changing the world can only be done by the smartest person in the world. Just put them in a room, let them figure it out. The solution of world hunger? Food. Wow, that was like so amazing. Some people see the bad in the world and they just decide to ignore it, but that won't help anything. Some people think you have to be really famous and super cool. In fact, lots of people think you have to be really powerful to make a difference, like being mayor or senator or president. But the truth is, a title doesn't make you more important. The world is changed by you. It's one person filled with love, and they just have to live it out, so they do something awesome. Then that person is filled with love, and they do something awesome. It just goes on and on and on and on. And the next thing you know, everything's awesome. Some people think it's impossible to change the world.
It's impossible to change the world.
Well, you can see why they could think that. Living in the world with kids who are hungry, people who are homeless, families weren't happy. I'm just trying to figure it out like everybody else, man. I do know this, though. Next time you feel overwhelmed or totally alone, remember this. Things don't have to be the way they are. The world is changed by ordinary people. Little people living out big love. And that's what gives the world a reason to dance.
I cannot agree more. Things don't have to be the way they are. The world is changed by ordinary people, little people living out big love. That's what gives the world a reason to dance. So this week, go do that. Like, while the rest of the world is saying, me first, choose to follow Jesus' example and say, after you. Live selflessly by noticing people's needs, like opening your hands, using your gifts, and sharing your joy, because when you do, I am positive that you can change someone's world.